Do short theme song intro. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy. Okay, so I just want to warn you, this is going to be a difficult video to watch if you have a heart, a soul, compassion, or any other quality that makes you a decent human. And I'm fairly confident you fall into this category. On May 19th, an encampment of unhoused people at Lamport Stadium in Toronto was destroyed by the city under heavy police presence. The following footage is from 680 News. Ask yourself and be honest. If you didn't know where this video took place ahead of time, would any city in Canada be in your top 10 guesses? This has been happening in Canada far more frequently than most people know, and how the media reports it only shows one page of a novel. I've lived in the shelter system in Toronto and came very close to spending nights on the streets, and I know many people who have. Allow me to tell you the full story through the eyes of someone with experience. Since most people don't read past the headlines, I'll start with 4 headlines I came across. In my last video, I mentioned how different media outlets often use the same source for their reporting. This is not one of those cases. These are 4 different takes on the same story. They cover a lot of the same ground, and the biases of the outlets show through. The Toronto Star: tensions flare as 5th Toronto homeless encampment cleared in a week at Lamport Stadium. The information this headline gives is that people were upset, there is a pattern of encampments being cleared, and where the incident took place. All 4 headlines I'm using have the word cleared or clearing. This word choice removes the human element of the story. You clear a path, you clear a table. You do not clear people. They were forcefully displaced. 640 News: tensions flare, arrests made as Toronto homeless encampment cleared by city officials. This headline has the added information that people were arrested. This is the second headline to have the word homeless in it. I have issue with how they use that word. The people in the encampment weren't homeless. Their homes were destroyed by city officials. How I distinguished unhoused from homeless is unhoused means you have no physical shelter that is safe and in a permanent location. But your home is where you feel safe, surrounded by people you call family. It's the community you choose to be a part of. The people in the encampment had a home with each other. Toronto.com: tensions erupt, arrests made as City of Toronto starts clearing Lamport Stadium encampment. This headline is a combination of the first 2 and has a subtitle under it: City continues removing tents from parks and public spaces despite calls to stop the evictions. This has a lot of information in it, but again, they weren't simply removing tents. They were removing people's homes. CBC: Toronto police make several arrests after clashes at Lamport Stadium during encampment clearing. And subtitle: City says residents have been offered spaces in shelters or hotels for months. In my last video, I mentioned how CBC used the subtitle that, in my opinion, painted the workers in a bad light. Well, the use of this subtitle paints the unhoused in a bad light. I'll get to this point in a moment, as all the articles cover this quote. I feel a more appropriate headline for this story would have been, "A community of people had their homes destroyed by the city so others could walk in a park without seeing the results of capitalism." I'm not going to go over the content of each article. There is a lot of overlap. If you're interested to see how the different media outlets cover the story, the articles are linked below for you to read, and I encourage you to do so you can learn more about media bias. I was able to put the following information together after reading all 4 articles, as not one of them includes everything I'm about to say. Trespassing orders were handed out to the residents on May 14th. Okay, but where are the people supposed to go? Threatening to charge them or fine them up to $10,000 doesn't solve the problem. All it does is make their lives harder because they'll have a record or a debt they'll never be able to pay. This is punishing them for being poor. Several arrests were made, but none of those arrested were residents of the encampment. It is important that this was noted. People need to keep in mind the residents are not responsible for the actions of the protesters who showed up on scene. The people were arrested for trespassing, and one was arrested for an assault of an officer. That person has a court date. 3 officers received minor injuries, 2 of them were treated on scene, and 1 was taken to hospital for treatment. 5 protesters also received injuries. There is no estimate as to how many protesters or police were on scene, but judging from the video, I'd say a lot. Okay, so here's where things start to get sticky. None of the articles mention how the officers were injured. It never stated if the assault the person was arrested for led to an injury. That person could have shoved an officer or many other things that are considered assault but don't lead to injuries. I have made this clear in other videos, and I'll say it again. I do not condone or agree with violence or threats of violence of any kind, no matter who's doing it. So what were their injuries in relation to? Just saying officers were treated for minor injuries leaves a lot open to interpretation. Was it a cut from equipment or a twisted ankle? Anything relating to the protesters, or was it something else? Maybe it was the protesters who injured the officers, and maybe it was because the protesters were struggling against the cops who were being violent towards them. This clip from Tim Turvey on Twitter shows a cop grabbing someone from behind and throwing them to the ground. Did the cop scrape his knuckles on the pavement when he did that and needed them to be looked at? I don't assume to know the answers, so I make no judgment. Instead, I keep an open mind and will accept facts when they are presented to me. I also want to point out only one of the articles mentions protesters were injured. In my experience, especially stories involving the police, this information is often omitted by media and can lead people to believe no other people were injured during an incident in which cops were harmed. Just because something wasn't reported on in the news doesn't mean it didn't happen. What I just said about the police injuries would apply to my thoughts of how the protesters were injured, except there's footage of the police harming them and doing so with little or no provocation. With the amount of violence used, I'm surprised there were only 5 injuries. Back to the inflammatory subtitle CBC chose to include under their headline. All of the articles have statements from officials, including from the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, saying that all the residents were offered safe indoor spaces at a shelter or hotel and programs that would provide them with a number of supports, but the residents refused the offers. Watching John speak, I picked up on a tone that he was frustrated people weren't taking him up on what he offered, and he was fed up with the problem of encampments and parks, so he feels justified wiping out their communities. What I felt was missing was any sense of understanding or sincere compassion. To simply say people didn't accept your offer of housing without explaining why is disingenuous and makes it seem like the people are ungrateful and difficult. If what you are offering is so great, why aren't they taking you up on that offer? And if you keep offering the same thing people don't want over and over, expecting different results and for these people to fall in line, You have no right to get frustrated. Hey, John Tory, if you look down on those living with poverty and can't think outside the box and come up with better strategies of handling the housing crisis, you probably shouldn't be mayor of Canada's largest city. Here's where I can fill in some gaps to help people understand the rest of the story because of my experience within the shelter system. The offer of hotel rooms is temporary, and they are being offered during COVID as a measure against spreading the virus in crowded shelters. Where are the people supposed to go once the pandemic is over and the hotel rooms are no longer available? This isn't a solution. Shelters and programs have time limits. When I was in the shelters, we were only allowed to use them for a set number of months, after which we would be denied access. We had no say over what we could eat. There was a curfew. What we were allowed to have on us was restricted. Our privacy was gone. We had no say in the people who were around us. The staff made assumptions about our character, that we were all liars, into drugs, and couldn't be trusted. We lived in constant fear that for some reason we'd be kicked out or that a bed would no longer be available for us. Our autonomy and freedom of choice was taken away. John says that the encampments are unsafe and unhealthy, but to many, the shelters are unsafe and unhealthy. At least in the encampments, you are free to make the choices you feel are best for you. The places offered to people most likely wouldn't allow them to bring their possessions from the encampment. Do you really expect them to give up their tent when they know it's most likely a matter of time before they're back on the streets? What if they have a dog or a cat companion? What if they're in a relationship and only one spot is available at a location, or the spaces offered separate people based on gender? And what is the ideal outcome these programs hope to have? The person gets a job in an apartment and lives happily ever after? The number of these encampments have been increasing during COVID because we are in a housing crisis. The most people in the encampments can hope for is a full-time job that pays minimum wage. That means a person working full-time with no days off for being sick or holidays makes around $2,280 a month. Only not really. After deductions, according to talent.com, the take-home pay is $1,900. And how much is a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto? According to rentals.ca, the average rent is $1,800 a month. I think you can figure out where the problem is. If working full-time can't afford you a place to live, people are forced onto the streets or out of the city. Minimum wage needs to cover the cost of living, or there will be no one available to do the majority of jobs the city relies on. Then the people with privilege have the nerve to complain about how no one wants to work serving them coffee. It's also important to know where these people are coming from and what they have created for themselves. People end up in a shelter or on the streets when all other options are exhausted. They have no family or anyone who can support them, or they have family who've rejected them, or family who is dangerous to be around. They've been abandoned, are outcasts, have been through traumas, and told they aren't wanted by society. Then, in a shelter or on the streets, they start to connect with people who understand what they're going through. I was in the shelters for a year, so every holiday and special occasion was spent there. I remember Christmas dinner. It was probably one of the best Christmas dinners I've ever had. Plenty of food had been donated, and we all sat around tables to eat. Even though none of us were related, all of us could relate. Any differences were put aside for that day. There was no arguing. We were surrounded by people who understood what we were all missing, and in it, we became the family we needed. We were grateful for that one day we knew we wouldn't go hungry, and appreciated how lucky we were for this. The bonds created between people going through this are intense. In an encampment, there are people around you to support you. If you need to talk, you have someone no matter what the time. If you need help, people who care about you are right there. Everyone supports one another and shares what they have. It makes you feel like you're part of something, and supporting others gives you a sense of purpose. The smaller communities are generally people who know one another, so they look out for each other and they feel safe. They accept each other's uniqueness and learn the best ways to interact and support each other. They are free to live their lives the best way they can with what they have. So then some stranger comes around and says they can put them in a shelter or a hotel room. A shelter is full of unknown people, many who may be harmful to them. In a hotel room, they would be alone and cut off from the community they helped build. The stranger isn't offering them shelter. What they are essentially offering is solitary confinement. Another thing people need to understand is that when you are unhoused, the only things you keep on you are things that are important. Maybe it brings you comfort, an escape. Maybe it's a memory of a different time or someone lost. You can develop emotional attachments to these items, even if it's the tent that kept you dry in the rain. The people in the encampment had to stand by and watch as police and city workers threw their possessions in the garbage like it was trash. There was a literal bulldozer used to remove someone's tiny wooden shelter. This is traumatic. I can tell you there are some items you never forget and for years can feel an emptiness without them. Then the people who threw away part of what made you whole turn around and expect you to trust them, telling you they know what's best for you? It doesn't work that way. The news articles you read are often from people who weren't there. They're just reporting on what they've been told. Here's what happened from the perspective of the people who were there. A warning. Some of this may be difficult to watch.
Oh, that's what we're going to find out. Oh, is that free?
You guys can come in. You guys can come in the living room and talk. Hey, let's get rid of these lines because these don't make anything.
Are you okay with being on Instagram?
From Encampment Support Network Toronto. More cops waiting in the wings for what? John Tory, is this your compassionate approach? There is no doubt about it. The cops lined up on those horses like that is intimidating. And that's the point.
Ladies and gentlemen,
From Affordable Housing Challenge Project. We condemn John Tory's law and order approach to encampments. The remaining residents feel at risk in the hotels they've been ordered to. Lack of trust is a result of decades of underfunding and under-regulating housing. Accommodations must be reached through dialogue, not force. And as you can see in this picture, the person looks absolutely devastated. They'll never forget this. People's Defense TO. Bulldozer tries to tow a tiny shelter out of a park, but supporters manage to block it. Residents and supporters are now holding off two bulldozers simultaneously. More support is needed at Lamport Stadium as John Tory attempts to evict encampment residents. Hashtag no COVID evictions. From Anisha. Here's how John Tory solves Toronto homeless crisis: violence and displacement. Every single councillor should be embarrassed and ashamed of themselves. Liars and cowards, all power to ESNTO and supporters. I understand why they're wearing the hazmat outfits because of COVID, but the imagery makes it look like they're treating the people like they are diseased. From Anisha. There goes John Tory bulldozer an encampment resident's tiny home. They are now homeless. This is City Councilor's affordable housing plan, death and displacement. All images from ESNTO. Share widely. #shame. That bulldozer is taking away someone's security, someone's lifeline, someone's home. From Joanna. This just in, tensions erupt, arrests made as City of Toronto starts clearing Lamport Stadium encampment. City continues removing tents from parks and public spaces despite calls to stop the evictions.
Don't say anything. Hey!
Oh my god!
Hey!
What's wrong with you? What on earth was
What are you guys doing? Hey,
What's
this is
wrong
on
with
video.
you?
This is on video.
You didn't even give him a chance to get in. He was walking over to the door.
Back him up. Back up the track.
Oh my god!
Hey, you're hurting him. You're hurting him. Stop. Hey, stop.
Thank you.
This is Canada. We are far past the point of saying the police can be reformed or retrained. They were trained to do a job, and that job is being the private security to the ruling class. This footage was taken the following weekend in Toronto at an anti-mask march. As you can see, the police are fully capable of not escalating the situation as they escort groups of people who promote harm to others by not wearing masks and spreading the virus, which will lead to more lockdowns, more economic pain, long-term illness, and death. The people in the encampment weren't harming anyone. They just wanted a safe place to live. But since the ruling class wants a park they can walk through without feeling uncomfortable with the society they created, the encampment had to go. They're policing poverty. And the problem with police goes far deeper than training. A few days after the erasure of the encampment, the Toronto Star reported that a few officers were seen to have been wearing thin blue line badges on their uniforms. For those not familiar with what that is, the thin blue line is a symbol of solidarity among police officers across Canada, and it represents the line officers walk daily between life and death. However, critics say the symbol creates an us versus them mentality, and it reflects how officers cover for each other's wrongdoings. A reminder was sent out to the officers to stick to uniform protocols and not wear the badge while on duty. Removing the badge doesn't remove the problem. I will repeat in case people are jumping through my video. I do not want any officer harmed in the line of duty, and no one should have to fear going to work. But what they are doing is inexcusable and causing trauma and harm to the community. There are not a few bad apples. There are a few good ones. And what happens to the good apples? They get picked out or are turned bad with the rest. I've met a former officer with PTSD. There are stories from officers who spoke up and were harassed by the others for crossing that thin blue line, especially if they were women. The police system as we know it needs to be abolished and the money put into places that help the community. The people of that encampment deserve to be treated humanely and with compassion, not pushed away like they were trash. So really, where are these people supposed to go? When people complain about encampments, push back and get them to say what they mean. The privileged people who complain tend to be the same people who don't believe in a living wage or free education or subsidized housing. They believe in a class system and that socialism of any kind is bad. They say, sure, the poor should have a place to live, just not near me or near places they can work or near places I go to on a daily basis. You have to get them to admit they want the problem gone, but are unwilling to support anything that would help, which means the only way for people with poverty to be out of sight would be if they were expelled from society, locked away, or dead. Try to get them to see how cruel their line of thinking is. The people with power are the problem. The people living with poverty are the results. To sum up this video, learn to be media savvy. Question what you read and understand you're only seeing part of a story. Don't blindly trust any one source and be open to receiving new information. Depending on which article you read, you will have a very different take of what happened. The media needs to do a better job covering all angles and informing the public of the full story. Breaking news! That's not going to happen so long as for-profit interests are involved. The police need to be abolished. Too many of them seem eager to inflict harm and too few try to stop it. We shouldn't have to live in fear of the people meant to protect us. What's the answer to the housing crisis? There is no one answer. Shelters and hotel rooms are not enough. People have diverse needs and we need diverse solutions, and some of these solutions may take a long time. There are more empty houses than there are people on the streets. Socialized housing, guaranteed livable income, treatment for mental health issues and addictions, building communities people want to be a part of and gives them a hope of an improved future. It's hard to fight to better yourself when all you see in front of you is more of what caused you to be in the spot you're in. Stop treating people with less as less than. I do have one positive takeaway from this whole story. We now know with full certainty John Tory is not a vampire. The silver spoon wedged up his ass would have given him away a long time ago if he were. I hope I gave you a fuller story of the issues at play. I know this has been a heavier topic, so thank you for taking the time to watch. Please be kind to yourself and do self-care if you need to decompress. I have my fur babies and MCU movies to help me with that. Don't forget to hit buttons and share this video. Follow me on Twitter, and if you can, become a Patreon. Link in the description box below. In the comment section, let me know what you think could help with the housing crisis. Salut, à la prochaine. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.